Hi, and welcome to episode 54 of the Give Me a Crown Knitting, Spinning and Bits and Pieces podcast. My name's Nina, also known as Give Me a Crown across the internet, and the neighbour's rooster is having a bit of a crow in the background. For any new viewers out there, thank you for checking me out. I'm from Finland, but I've spent more than half my life in Australia. I was living in Sydney, and earlier this year I decided to give country living a try, so I'm now in the central west of New South Wales and enjoying country life. I'm recording a day late. Today is Tuesday the 18th of October 2016, and I normally record on Mondays at the moment, but the rain kept pattering away on the roof yesterday, so today it's a little bit windy, so there may be some random noises in the background of wind rattling the roof, but hopefully you can bear with me and I'll show you my projects. I don't have any spinning this week, but I do have a finished object that I've knit, and I also have some works in progress. We have a Ravelry group called Give Me a Crown, and we're currently having a colour work knit along called Give Me Colour KAL. So it's running until the 31st of October. No one seemed to react to wanting to have the deadline extended like I mentioned last week, so I think what I'll do, because the knit along finishes on Monday, I will do my recording on Tuesday for that week so that I can do the drawing as soon after the knit along finishes. Of course, if you feel like you need extra time, if you need the extra week, then pop by the Ravelry group and let me know, or send me a private message on Ravelry and I'll adjust the deadline. But I think that quite a few people have got some projects on the needles, but I don't think they've got too much further to go, so hopefully everyone can get in before the end of the month. So, on with my finished object. And happily, it's my Rose City Rollers socks. So these were a bit of a slow knit. I wasn't having a particular deadline with these, but I was kind of keen to get them off my needles so that I could cast on some new projects. So I followed the pattern as it was written, apart from the toe where I just reverted to a standard toe that I use. And I knit these from some Hot Socks Cotton Stretch Sock and Wool. And this yarn has some polyamide or nylon in it, as well as some elastic or elite that they call it on here. And so it was the first time that I'd used that for a project, and to be honest, I wasn't a fan. I found it very, very grippy on the needles. I tried a few different needles out and ended up using my zings, but even those were kind of grippy and it just felt like I was battling with the yarn a fair bit. I also don't know what the purpose of having elastic in the yarn really is, because the stockinette fabric is kind of elastic on its own and ribbing can be elastic, so it just seemed a bit overkill in my books to have that in the yarn. I'm sure these will be fun to wear. I've tried them on, they feel fine. They feel just so much lower than the socks that I'm used to wearing, because I'm still wearing doubled up woolly thick socks at the moment because it's still cold out here. So yeah, I'll have to see how they go once the weather actually warms up, but for now they seem like they're a fine pair of socks. It's a self-striping yarn with different lengths of stripes or different widths, and I wanted the socks to be different, so I knit one sock from the inside of the ball and the other from the outside of the ball by rewinding the yarn ball and knitting from there. So the stripes go in opposite directions. So I think that's an easy way to make sure that the socks don't look slightly matchy but not quite, because I've had that problem before. I had somewhere that much yarn left from one ball, so the ball of yarn had 50 grams in it, and that's about 2 grams, and the socks weigh 48 grams, so half a skein went into these, and I've got a slightly longer foot than the average female foot, so for most people, most women, a 50-gram ball of yarn or half a skein should be fine. I think it was a good beginner pattern if you haven't knit socks before. It's a good idea to try something like the Rose City rollers, because you get to try out the different parts of construction on a sock just to sort of see how it goes before launching into perhaps a patterned sock project. And I also like just stockinette socks. I think that they're perfectly functional and fun and easy to knit when you're wanting to sort of let your mind focus on other things. So it's not one of those projects where you just have to keep focusing on what you're doing, which can be fun from time to time. So yeah, I don't think I'll use this yarn again. So I've got one ball left over. Not too sure what to do with that. I've never destashed on Ravelry before, so I'm not sure if it's worthwhile trying to figure that out for one ball of yarn or whether I give this to somebody. So decisions. So those are my socks, and I have also been working on some other projects. So as part of the Give Me Colour knit along, I'm working on some colourwork socks, and these are the Echoes from Corellia socks by the Knuckled. It's a free pattern on Ravelry. So last week I had finished one leg and started on the second leg, and one or the other, I must have finished that one, started on that one, finished that one, and now I've swapped back over. So I'm trying to do these concurrently, sort of section by section, because I'm using two different sets of needles, two different sizes, one size for the plain knitting and one for the colour work. So I'm up to working on the heel on one of the socks, and there's been some, I'm dropping my knitting, there's been a little bit of cabling on here, and the cabling was kind of fun. I used the chart. I'm not sure if it's actually written up as well or if it's just the chart. It might have just been the chart, and it wasn't until I started knitting on it that I realised that the X's that are there line up with the X's that are up here as well. So it's actually kind of clever in the way that it's been done. It's only the sort of thing that the knitter would ever notice, I think, or at least with the yarn choice that I've made. Perhaps with some other yarn colours it would be more obvious. But it's a fun little cable pattern. It's a bit tricky. It's not just your normal knits and purls sort of being switched around. There's knitting through the back loop and all sorts of fun things, but it was a little bit challenging but fun, so I enjoyed working on that. If you haven't worked with charts before, I definitely recommend it. Some charts are better than others, so some will use more standard chart symbols. So this one seems to use the standard symbols, so a dot would be a pearl, and then the way that the angles on the symbols go indicate which direction the cable is moving. So after a few rows I was able to just ignore the key, and I was able to figure out which way I was knitting. Some people are so clever that they can just sort of see the stitches once, and then they can figure out exactly what they're doing without actually having to refer back to the chart. I'm not that clever yet, or that practiced yet, perhaps. So I think with time and doing more chart work I'd get to that point, but for now I'm happy to just have the chart on my iPad on my lap, and I just look back to it when I do that section. There was some chatter in the Ravelry group about a comment I made last week about how I tension my yarn, and I was happy to know that I'm not the only knobbly knuckled knitter out there. So I've got fingers that have got sort of chunkier knuckles and then skinnier bits in between, and it makes tensioning a little bit difficult or just different. And one of the suggestions was to use the ring finger as the tensioning finger in order to try to get the yarn closer to the fingertip when you're knitting. So this is at least with continental knitting. I don't know about English knitting, about whether that same sort of idea works with the other hand. I've been playing around with different ways, but I'm still not able to get the yarn sitting as close to my fingertip as what some people do. But I'll keep playing around with it and see how that goes, trying more of the different tensioning, because otherwise when I'm doing colour work I tension on my little finger. When I'm not knitting with two yarns, I actually just end up draping the yarn and I kind of hold it against the knitting, and that's my tensioning. And that's a trick that I learnt from my mum a little while ago. She was sort of puzzled about why I was wrapping yarn around my finger, and she showed me how she didn't even do the wrapping. And that's sort of how I've started doing just my normal knitting. But when it comes to colour work, I still do the wrapping, because I find that the two yarns try to become loose at different rates. I'm still not perfect at it by any means. I still have to sometimes stop in the middle of a needle and adjust my tension on the two yarns, because they sort of go out of sync. But it's just a matter of practice, I think, and playing around with the techniques to find a way that works. I'm finding that this is a slightly rusticy yarn. I don't actually know exactly what it is. It's something that I picked up in Finland, but it looks like a hand spun in a way. It might not show up on camera, but it's sort of fuzzy in a way, so more of a woolen spin than a worsted spin. And I'm using some very pointy needles, and it's sort of splitting every now and then, so I'm just having to pay a bit of attention to my knitting to make sure that I'm not splitting the yarn and causing some problems that I have to then rectify a few rows later. These will end up being hand wash only socks, because I'm using what I presume is 100% wool, apart from this grey, which is a regia that has some nylon in it. So it'll be interesting to see how it wears up. But the heel, for instance, is coming up nice and thick with the instructions from the pattern. So it's a slip stitch kind of heel, but it's doing the slips on the purl side rather than the knit side like I normally do. So it'll be interesting to see if it feels different being worn. But yeah, so I'm halfway through the heel, and I think they're coming up pretty good. Oh, the other thing, the pattern suggests doing 4 repeats of the cable chart. I've only done 3 because I tried this sock on and I felt like it was coming up a little bit high on my calf, that if I did the 4th one it might sort of be a bit too restrictive on my leg. So I don't know if that's just the way that I've cast on, or quite what's causing that, but it could be the length of my calf for all I know. But it's always a good idea to try socks on as you go and see how they're fitting, so that you can make adjustments. So that's those. So I've got a couple of weeks to finish those up, and it sort of felt like I've been knitting the leg forever, because I'm knitting two legs at once. But I think once I get past the heel on both of them, the foot should zoom along and I'll get them finished in time for the end of the knit along. I have also knit a couple of squares on my sock yarn blanket. So this blanket hasn't been shown for a while. I'm up to 108 squares in total, and I use 26 stitches per side, and I'm knitting with 2.5mm needles. And I think that I still need to do maybe one more column on my blanket, and then a bunch more rows, and then I'll put a border on it, and then I think I'm going to call it a day, because I'm keen to start other scrap yarn projects, but I don't want to start until I get this one done. So I started it, I think it was May last year, so I've been working on it for almost a year and a half, and it would be lovely to get it finished before the end of this year, but that might not happen. So if I could finish it by the 2-year mark, then I think that would be good. So the 2 squares that I've added this week, I added this one, which was sent to me by a lovely viewer. I can't remember exactly what this one is, but I have it written down somewhere. So it's a self-striping yarn, which is, it's got some nice pretty pinks and blues in there. And then this one is another one that was sent to me by a lovely viewer, and this is a Dingo Dye Works Fair Dinkum, which is a not superwash yarn base in the Wallaroo colourway, and it's got some it's a lovely sort of grey with just a little bit of tonality to it, so it was lovely to work with again. It was another one of another Dingo Dye Works mini that I popped in here, so I'm definitely itching to buy some Dingo Dye Works yarn, but I just need to get a few things off the needles and decrease my stash a little bit before I make some more yarn purchases. So that is making some progress. I've also been working on my Taskutakki cardigan. Now this is a complete and utter mess at the moment, and it looks like this. So I can't really show it to you too much. I think part of the problem is that I decided to leave some cables in place and put cable stoppers on them where it said that I should be putting scrap yarn in to hold the pockets in place. So I've left the cables in and they keep tangling up everywhere, and I think that I'm actually going to have to just put some scrap yarn in, otherwise they're going to make me not want to knit on this. But I finished up the second pocket, and I'm now working on a sort of a flap that goes on the inside of the pocket. So it does the outside construction first and then the inside. So I'm now working on the inside parts, but it's a tangle of yarn. I've somehow seem to have 3 yarn balls attached to it at the moment, which isn't ideal because they just keep getting tangled, and I want to work on it but I've also wanted to get my colour work things finished and the socks finished, so I'm not going to need this until next autumn. So I'm just going to try to plug away at it a little bit each week, and I'm sure that by next autumn I will have a lovely cardigan that's going to be a joy to wear. So that's that one. So that's all of my works in progress, but I thought that I would show some of my mum's knitting again. I didn't get a chance to actually record her knitting this week, but I'm going to try to pin her down this week and get some footage of the way that she knits, because it's ridiculously fast and fascinating to watch, and I'd love it myself just to be able to slow it down and study what she's doing. But she's been going through stash again, and she's knit a colourwork pair of socks. So these ones have got a beautiful snowflake pattern, and she grabbed this from, I can't remember if it was one of my books or one of my magazines. It might have been a Novita, a Finnish magazine, and it was a pattern for a mitten. So she's put that on the front and then put some patterning on the back, and then she was sort of pondering how to do the heel decreases, and that wind is picking up, so I'm sorry if you can hear it. But yeah, she looked at whether to do stripes. She ended up doing a bit of a speckly effect, and then some more of the same from the back of the leg she put down on the bottom of the foot, and I think they're amazing, completely and utterly amazing. And she kind of knit, making it up as she went along. Knit the first one, and then just referred to that to make the second one. So that's amazing, completely amazing. Her sort of curiosity and just wanting to play is amazing. And I said last week that she hadn't knit socks for a very long time up until recently, so yeah, her knitting ability is just weird. Weird and good. But so after doing that, she decided to use up some more of the random green yarns that I had lying around, and she's doing a green version. And she wasn't sure at first whether or not the pattern was coming up well enough, but I think it's coming up perfectly well. So I think she's doing these at exactly the same size and just making them the same. She is using, I think they look like zings. They're 3mm zings, because this is a thicker yarn. I think it's considered a 10-ply, but I wouldn't say that it's quite that thick. But the 3mm needles work well with it to create a good thickness. And I've just noticed that she's obviously used a very long tail to cast on, and then she's done a little bow to hold that extra yarn tail out of the way. So that's a tip that I'll have to pick up at some point. I usually get to a point with long tails that I just end up snipping them off at a more reasonable length when I cast on with a long tail. So yeah, Mum's very clever socks. So I'll show those when they're finished next week. And those, by the way, the red and white ones hadn't been blocked yet, but they look pretty amazing already as they are. So very proud of my mum, and hopefully I'll get some of the footage of her knitting for you next week. No more knitting, so just a bit of chatter. I have been keeping an eye on the birds in the garden, and our local magpies have had some babies that have popped around in the garden. The babies look about the same size as the parents, but they have this sort of fluffy nature to them, to their feathers, and they sit around and they squawk and wait for food to be delivered to their mouths. So it's been fun watching them. I took a bit of footage of them, so I'll pop that in at the end. They thankfully they don't attack, unlike some of the magpies further down in the village. And I found out the other day that one of those magpies that had sort of swooped on me a couple of times had actually attacked someone and managed to make a dent in their forehead. So I'm kind of thankful that I stopped walking down that path, but I did go down there recently with my mum and we didn't get attacked. So I think that particular magpie's sort of protective protective nature has sort of calmed down, which is good, because magpie attacks are scary. I have also been playing around with my little garden. Some of my herbs have been popping up that I planted a long time ago, back in autumn, and they didn't do too much over winter, but they have started popping up. So I've had my first bits of parsley out of my garden, which tasted amazing, and I've planted some cherry tomatoes, an actual sort of seedling, so it's got some flowers already on it, so that should come up nicely. Some of my beetroots are actually appearing sort of slightly on top of the soil, which I'm not too sure if that's what they're meant to be doing, if that means that they're a little bit too crowded in the pot that I've got them in, but at least there's something growing, and at some point I'll be able to pull out probably a beetroot that's about that big. But it's fun watching things grow. I've also planted some coriander seeds because I forgot to plant them when I was last doing the major gardening, and I've been sort of trying to thin out some of the plants because there was a few too many seeds. I got a little bit too heavy-handed with popping seeds into the pots, but I might put a bit of footage in at the end of my random collection of pots with plants growing in them, or veggies or herbs. And I think that with spring the countryside seems to be coming to life, that there's a lot more events and things that are being advertised. So there are some that I'm thinking about heading off to. I have no idea what the National Field Days is. It seems to be some kind of agricultural show, but they also have art and food and various things. So it seems to be a big thing that's happening later on this week. So I'm going to see if I get a chance to pop by there and have a bit of a look and maybe see some sheep and tractors and hay bales and who knows what else. So it's sort of on the cards as long as the weather is sunny and if other things don't sort of get in the way. So I'm going to wrap it up there. I have a few things to drop off to the post office, so I'll get this video processing and get it uploaded to YouTube and then get onto the sewing machine for the rest of the day. So thank you very much for watching. It's lovely to have your company, get comments and feedback and what have you. Don't forget about the Give Me a Colour knit along. There's still time to knit a beanie or a pair of socks perhaps if you hop onto it and if you're a fast knitter. So I hope that you're having lots of fun with your crafts and I'll see you soon.